Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with part 2 of my May wrap-up. I will link part 1 down below, and as well as like links mentioned and content warnings and all of that. And the first book I'm going to talk about in the second part of the wrap-up is Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Bully. I finally read this and like, oh my gosh. I had sky-high expectations for this book because I have never heard someone that didn't enjoy it, and it still exceeded all of my incredibly high expectations. This was incredible. This was brilliant. I know I haven't even summarized it, but like one of my favorite books of the year easily. So this is a mystery thriller slash contemporary. We're following our main character Donis Fontaine, who is half Ojibwe and half white, and close to the beginning of the book she witnesses a horrible murder, and that ends up pulling her into an FBI investigation with some drugs that have been turning up around her community, and trying to figure out who is behind that and what is going on. She ends up agreeing to work with the FBI and kind of go undercover for this because of her very strong feelings about, you know, helping her community and protecting them, and because of what she witnessed. She also meets a boy named Jamie, who there seems to be something kind of weird about him. And like I said, I absolutely loved this. Like, I've been meaning to get to this book for ages, and I am so glad that I finally did. Again, just incredible. I don't often mention when something is a debut or not, just because that's not a way that I tend to like frame my reviews a lot of times. Like, I don't usually, I don't know, I don't want to weight that too heavily. Like, I don't want to say things like, well, it was good for a debut, or like whatever. Like, I don't usually think of that in terms of my reading and reviewing. But with this book, I was very aware the whole time I was reading it, because I've heard people talking about it being a debut and what a fantastic debut it was. So I was very aware of that, and like, it is incredible to me that this is Angeline Bully's first novel. Like, I know that she's been working on it for quite a few years, but still, like, the incredible writing, the way this is plotted, the character development, the way that even from the first couple of chapters where she's just kind of setting up these characters and their community, the way that she brings in all of these details about setting and characters and like culture and everything in a way that feels so organic is just incredible to me. I adore Donis as a main character. She is going on that list of characters that I love so much, where it's like, I want to be a good enough person that I would be her friend, you know, that she would want to be friends with me. I just admire Donis so much. She is so intelligent and strong and like such a fiercely good person, and I loved seeing her connection with her community, with her family, with the elders of her community. There are a few moments with them that like brought tears to my eyes because they were just so beautifully conveyed, like the emotion there and the importance that these people have in Donis's life. I thought her family dynamics were so complex and so interesting. I also found the mystery and the like plot of this to be incredibly gripping. Like, the first day that I started reading this, I was like, oh, I'll read just like a few more chapters before bed. And I think I read like 300 pages, more than 300 pages of this like almost 500 page book. Like, or maybe it was 500 pages. Like, I just didn't want to put it down. I was like, I need to stop and go to bed before Donis figures out something else, because then I'm just gonna want to like finish the book. One of the only things that I heard from people is that, like, even though, like I said, everybody seems to be enjoying this, there were a couple people who were saying that like the mystery part didn't work for them as well. Granted, I am not somebody who reads a lot of mysteries or thrillers, but I found the mystery very, very compelling and very well written. There were a couple of parts where I actually gasped out loud while reading this book. I just thought it was incredible. I do want to mention there are quite a few content notes for this, so do check that out in the description if that's something you'd want to know about. But I just thought this was so well written, like the nuance, like the themes here about like community and love and grief. Like, I really love how Donis is such a brilliant science student, and she also is very good and places a high value on her cultural knowledge. Like, those things are both important aspects of her character and of what makes her such an intelligent person and such a good investigator, and those are not shown to be in opposition to each other. I really loved getting to see these details about the Ojibwe culture and practices and religious beliefs and everything. I'm just so grateful to have gotten to read this book. Like, this is just an incredible piece of storytelling, and this is one of those books where, like, obviously personal taste is always going to be a factor, but this is one of those novels where, like, I don't know how you could argue against the fact that this is a fantastically crafted novel. Like, I'm sure there are people out there who do, but like, I just feel like this is such an obviously brilliant piece of writing, that it's hard for me to picture that, I guess. It's hard for me to picture somebody reading this and being like, it's not that great. Like, you may not enjoy it as much as somebody else, but how do you not acknowledge that this is fantastic? Anyway, as you can tell from my gushing, I gave Firekeeper's Daughter 5 stars. Absolutely loved this. I am so glad I finally read it, and I'm very excited for anything that Angeline Boulley writes next. Next, I finished Bloomsbury Girls by Natalie Jenner. I received this copy in exchange for an honest review. I will link that spoiler-free review down below. And I do want to mention, like, I talk about this in my review, but this is kind of loosely connected to the Jane Austen Society, which is this author's previous novel. I have not read that one yet, and I do feel like this one, it does spoil a little bit in terms of like character connections or the overall things that happened in that novel, but if you know a little bit about the history of the Jane Austen Society, I don't think it's going to be that big of a surprise. Like, I read this one first, and I'm now even more excited to read the Jane Austen Society. And this follows 3 different women as our main characters. 2 of them already work in this bookshop called Bloomsbury Books, and then the other young woman, she starts working there soon after the start of the novel, and it's about the 3 of them doing their best in this very male-dominated field. Evie is the young woman who starts working here at the beginning of the novel, and she's also there for a particular reason that we find out later in the book, and it's about these women getting to know each other better, getting to rely on each other. This is also set in the post-war period, so after World War II, and it's very clear, like, this book is really about people trying to live in that aftermath, and obviously it's not, like, the things that happened during World War II are not just, like, over and done with and forgotten. It very much affects these characters' lives, even though this is not a book that is set during the war. And I just really loved this. I love these main women so much. They're all very different people, very distinct characters, and I love that this book does not have any girl-on-girl hate. Like, at no point in the story is there like a bitchy mean girl that they have to overcome, and that was just so nice, and it made me realize how rare that is in storytelling, which is sad. I want that to happen more often. The bookshop setting was of course fun. I also really loved the cameos we get from some of the other really interesting women of the day, like in different like industries, and I love thematically what this book says about women supporting each other and about women in these fields that are very dominated by men, about women authors, about like some of the celebrities that get cameos in this book. I just love this book. Like, I was obviously expecting to enjoy it, but I loved it even more than I thought I would. Please check out my review if you want more thoughts, but I gave Bloomsbury Girls 5 stars. Next, I finished The Many Meanings of Meilan by Andrea Wong. We're following our main character Milan, who at the very beginning of the novel, her and her family end up selling their family bakery and moving to Redbud, Ohio. And she is one of the only non-white people there. And so this book deals a lot with identity and with race and with microaggressions especially, and it also deals a lot with like family expectations and the way that we will like hide or show different parts of ourselves. Like, Milan ends up learning that there are several different meanings for her name. Like, the way her name is spelled, it can mean a few different things, and she kind of uses that to make sense of the way that she has to be one person at home, you know, doing like living up to her family's dreams for her, and then she's another person at school where she's trying to just go under the radar, and then she's another person when she's with her friend Logan, who's a new friend that she makes when she gets there, and how she feels more like she can be her true self around him. And I thought that exploration of language was really interesting. That was one of the things I was really looking forward to about this book, was that way of connecting language to identity and like different parts of ourselves. I did really love her friendship with Logan. She also makes friends with a girl named Anita, who I wish there had been more with her, but even though she does deal with bullying and some really awful kids at school, she does have these kind of bright spots. She does have people she can rely on, and I really like the way that the conversations she has with Logan, who is white, I really like the way those were handled, because like part of Logan's arc is like understanding that they have very different experiences of the world. Like, they have some really great conversations about the way that racism can be very subtle and people can sometimes not even realize that they're participating in it, but how it's your job to notice that and to stop doing that. And I think those were done in a way that was really thoughtful, but also very appropriate for kids. Like, appropriate in the sense that like I think they're going to get the concepts. I also really liked Milan's relationship with her grandfather. I thought Milan's character arc was well done, like her kind of realizing that that she should be around people who she can be all of her selves with, you know, she can be her full self with. Like I said, I think the issues were handled well about like racism and belonging and identity, like language. And I like the different things we got about Chinese culture and language and practices about like mourning and honoring their ancestors and everything. So I did really enjoy a lot of things about this book. There were a few things though that I think could have been done better. Like I was saying, one thing I was really looking forward to is the way that Meilan's different meanings of her name would connect, like the idea of like language and how that represents identity and things like that. And I guess I was expecting that to be more in the sense of language, whereas here, like in the book, it actually felt more literal than I thought it was going to be. Like it felt like Meilan was like literally sectioning off like pieces of herself and being a different person in different situations. And like I understand, I think, what the book was communicating with that, but like there were a lot of times where I'm like, this is, I think, a psychological like unhealthy thing to do, and I wish that had been, like, the way it was written just felt very literal in a way that like I think she should have talked to somebody about this. Like the book only really talks about that in the sense that she realizes that she needs to be her full self, which is true and I agree with, but I just wish that I don't know, it just felt a little weird, I guess, the way that her different ways of being herself were written as reading like almost literally different people, if that makes sense. There were also some character turnarounds, one in particular that I think we needed to spend more time on maybe. I do appreciate that Milan tells this person that like, you know, I appreciate your apology, I'm glad you helped me, but I don't know when I'm gonna be able to forgive you because of the way you've been treating me, and I like that. But I just thought we needed more time with that. And then another big issue I had is like the beginning of the book, the thing that makes their family have to leave is that one of Milan, and this is not a spoiler because it happens at the very beginning, but like one of Milan's aunts hears her telling a bedtime story to her little cousin, and this aunt thinks that this bedtime story means that Milan's father has been secretly like stealing money from the family. And I just thought that was so weird that like these adults would like believe that this child's bedtime story was a confession of a very serious crime. It was very weird, like the way that was like handled as like, and treated like that was the reason that everything happened. And like poor Milan feels like responsible for this when it's not her fault. And I just felt like that was very unreasonable. Like there is like a comment about how this aunt of hers has always placed a lot of importance on dreams and what dreams mean, but that is not what happened here. This was not like a dream she had. This was like she heard a child telling another child a fairy tale she made up, and she took that to mean that Milan's family was evil and like stealing money from the rest of the family. And I thought that was very weird. That did color like a good chunk of my experience with the first part of the book, because like it was just so bizarre, and I just think we should have, I don't know, I think there was a way that we could have done that in a less frustrating way, that we could have got the characters to where they needed to be. There are some references later to the fact that like, oh, well, that just showed problems that were already there in the family. Okay, but I just wish that would have been done differently. I do recommend this though. I think it was well done, and I gave The Many Meanings of Meilan 4 stars. Next, I finished Radical Reinvention by Kaya Oakes, An Unlikely Return to the Catholic Church. This is one I've been reading over a very long period of time because I was really, really enjoying it, and I wanted to, I don't know, I guess savor it more. But this is a memoir about Kaya Oakes, as it says, coming back to the Catholic Church after she was like born and raised in it, and then she left for a long period of time, and then as an adult, I forget how old she was. I think she was in her 30s maybe. She ends up coming back, and she says like in a lot of ways she is not at all what people might expect from like the typical like Catholic person, which she also addresses some of those like misconceptions as well, which I thought was interesting. And so yeah, this is just like a memoir about like what it was like coming back, like why she came back. She's not at all trying to convince people. She's just talking about like her own experience and her own story, and the value that she finds in it, and how it can be very, very difficult. And like I just really like that she talks about like the messy, ugly parts of faith. Like I think there's sometimes a perception that like belief is the easy way out, or that religious practice is somehow the easy way out. And I think for like maybe for some people it is, and there are obviously like good parts and comforting parts, but I think for a lot of people it actually really, really complicates your life. And I really appreciate the way that Kaya Oakes talks about that here, like the way that in modern society does not make it easy for some people to understand why somebody would come back. And she talks about some of the harm that the Catholic Church has done and continues to do, and she in no way is excusing that. She really like grapples with that and with how people can stay in institutions that do harm because there are people within them that are doing a lot of good, and that she understands why people wouldn't stay, why people would leave, but she also kind of talks about, conversely, the reasons that people would stay. Also, I have to say how like interesting and eye-grabbing this cover is. But yeah, I just really, really love this. I did review one of Kaya Oak's more recent books, like for nonfiction, which I'll link that review down below, that I also thought was very good. But this one was, I think, even more personally meaningful for me. I also just think as a writer, she's incredibly talented. Like, this book is very engaging and very funny, but also I think the way she deals with these heavy ideas is just very deft. One of the things that really strikes me about this book, and that I know, but it's nice to have this reminder, is that, like, even if you just look at, like, by the numbers, the perception of Catholics and of the Catholic Church is very, very different from what the majority of people in the church believe about, like, social issues and things like that, which can be surprising for people because of the way that, like, the Catholics who end up in the news are a very particular kind. And this is not to say that we don't need to worry about the powerful or high profile people who are very bigoted. This is not to say, like, oh, don't worry about them, because there's not that many of them. It is obviously important to talk about those issues within the church and with different belief systems and everything. Like, it's obviously important to talk about those issues, but I just think this book is a great example of how one of the strategies, I think, for making people feel like there's nothing they can do is that they convince us that there's a lot more of them. Anyway, I feel like I'm rambling because this was obviously a very personal reading experience. I do think, though, if you are just interested in this kind of spiritual memoir, you would enjoy this. I myself am Catholic, but I don't think that this is written assuming that the reader necessarily is. I think Kaya Oakes does a pretty good job of contextualizing and explaining different things she's talking about within the Catholic Church, so that even if you're not, I think you could, like, definitely pick up on what she's talking about. So yeah, I thought this was absolutely fantastic. Again, this is a very meaningful book for me personally, but I also just think as a piece of nonfiction, it was really well done, very engaging and well written. I do want to mention that because this was published a couple of decades ago, some of the language that was considered inclusive at the time is not language we would use today, but that's because of when this was published. Like, the author obviously uses the more inclusive language now in more recent things she's written. And I obviously gave Radical Reinvention 5 stars. Next, I finished New Kid by Jerry Craft. This is a graphic novel that I picked up because I really enjoyed the very short comic that he did in Black Boy Joy, and I had heard obviously wonderful things about New Kid, but this is what really, like, pushed me to pick it up, was enjoying something else by him. And this was just as fantastic as everyone said. I can absolutely see why it won the Newbery and, like, a bunch of other awards. So this is a graphic novel, as I said. Let me show you a little bit of the art style, which I thought was really fun and very expressive. So our main character is Jordan, who is a young black boy, and he ends up, his parents are really excited because he's been accepted into a very elite, like, private school for middle school, I think it's middle school. It's like a combination, maybe middle school, high school. And so he ends up going there, and he is one of the only black kids there. One of the only kids of color, I think, at all. And it's about his experiences adjusting. He's at first not really happy to be going to this school, but he does start making friends there. There are also some kids who are not very nice there. This book deals a lot with microaggressions in a way that, once again, I think is really well suited to the age group that this is intended for, but I think it still handles them with a lot of nuance. Like, you can make conversations accessible to kids without dumbing them down, and I think this graphic novel is a great example of that. Jordan also really loves to draw, and so we see that throughout the graphic novel as well. I thought the humor in this was great. Like, I actually, like, laughed out loud a couple of times, which doesn't happen a lot for me when I read. I also found the story very easy to follow with the way the panels were laid out, which I've talked about before is something I sometimes struggle with in graphic novels. And I also thought the friendships in this were really well done. So yeah, definitely add my recommendation to everybody else's, but I thought this was brilliant. I gave New Kid 5 stars. Next, I finished Spindle by W.R. Gingell. This is the first book in the Two Monarchies sequence, which is a series of, I think, connected companion novels. So this is the first one, and this is a Sleeping Beauty retelling. And this is my third thing I've read from this author, and I'm definitely glad I didn't start with this, because even though I really enjoyed it, I think as an introduction to this author, it maybe would have been a little too weird and confusing. Like, I definitely would recommend starting with one of her novellas, as opposed to this, but I did really end up enjoying this one. So our main character is Polyhymnia, or Polly is what she goes by for most of the book, and she wakes up from an enchanted sleep when a wizard kisses her awake, and she is understandably like, what are you doing? What's going on? She ends up finding out that she has been put to sleep for a couple hundred years, but also that people think she's the princess, and she's actually not. And she is trying not to let people know that because she thinks there's there's a much better chance that people will listen to her and answer her questions if they think she's a princess, which is sadly probably true. And so Polly and Luck, who is the wizard who woke her up, they end up traveling together to the capital to try and figure out what exactly happened to Polly. Also, Polly has magically growing hair, which she's insisting is not hers because she knows she doesn't have magic, so we're also trying to figure out what's going on with that. And yeah, it's kind of hard to summarize this one beyond that. I do want to mention that the synopsis mentions the incredibly irritating wizard who woke you and apparently needs to keep kissing you to keep you awake, which I feel like is a little misleading because it kind of makes it sound like that's going to be like a running joke in the book, and I think that happens like twice. So just wanted to note that. But yeah, I liked this. I really enjoyed Polly as a main character. I also really liked Luck, although he could be a little frustrating sometimes, but I think it was mostly for understandable reasons. Also, I saw several people compare this to some of the feelings you get from Howl's Moving Castle, which I definitely agree with in terms of some of the character dynamics, but this is not like a retelling or anything, and I don't think you have to like that to enjoy this, but I do see the similarities there. I think if you hate Howl, you probably wouldn't like Luck, although I think in some ways Luck is a little less frustrating than Howl is, and I say this as somebody who loves Howl. I also really like the relationship dynamic between Polly and Luck, although I would have liked even more time spent on that. There's also a like dog/child named One Piece, which I assume is a reference to that like manga or anime. And he's an example of a character type that I often find annoying, but I think he was actually written very well. I thought the world was interesting. I thought the overall story and like figuring out what was going on was interesting. This is definitely a very creative take on Sleeping Beauty, and I did have a good time with this. I had a few issues though. I think that we could have spent a little less time being confused, because there are, like, I understand that because we're seeing this from Polly's perspective, we're not going to know everything right away, but there were a few times, actually also similar to Diana Wynne Jones, there were a few times where I'm like, I think I know what's going on, like what you're explaining to me, but I'm not 100% sure. So I think that we could have had a little more explanation. And there were also some parts of the story that dragged a little bit because we were kind of just waiting around for Polly and Luck to figure something out or to find more answers. And like, I really enjoyed the characters that we met during those parts, and like the way we were seeing like magic explored and everything. So like there were interesting things happening, but I just think that kind of contributed to the feeling of like there's too much confusion going on, because we would have these long stretches where it's like, I still don't know what's happening and I'm just waiting for somebody else to figure it out and to tell the reader. So I think we could have had less of that. I also want to mention that sometimes the consent could be a little murky. And I know that I saw some reviewers were definitely very bothered by this, which I totally understand. I think part of that is to be expected in a Sleeping Beauty retelling, because like you're being woken up by a stranger kissing you. But people also really didn't like the way that Luck sometimes spoke or responded to Polly, which again, I understand. I think there are a few reasons that it didn't bother me as much though. One of them is because I think the way Luck is written, it's very clear that like he's just very absent-minded, and so he wouldn't necessarily, like, him not understanding that Polly's like, hey, personal space, it doesn't mean that he's not respecting her, I don't know, her consent or her wishes. It was more just like he needs to be reminded to pay attention to the fact that other people say things, which does not excuse what he does, but I think it makes it less creepy feeling to me than it would have. And then also there are some actual, like, I think plot reasons for why he does what he does. Like, I know some people were very bothered when he said to Polly, like, you need to listen to me and do blah, 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 or I'm gonna have to kiss you again, and we know you don't like that. And the reason he said that is because that is the way that he had to wake her up, and Polly responded in a way that she was, like, really not happy about it. And so he was genuinely trying to keep her from being in a position where he would have to wake her up again, if that makes sense. So in a sense, I think there were some extenuating circumstances for that, but I did want to mention that, and again, I understand why that would bother people. For me, I think the way the characters were written and the way the plot was written, it made sense why these things happened, but I do wish they had been written differently or handled differently. But overall, I did enjoy this. I gave Spindle 4 stars, and I do think it is a very interesting start to this companion series. Next, I finished a reread of North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. This was for Past It Classics. Taylor was the host for that live show. I will link that down below. As always happens when I tab a book, this is an example of why I rarely tab books, because look at this nonsense. I really loved this reread though. This is a classic novel. We are following Margaret Hale and John Thornton as our main characters. Margaret is from the south of England, and her family end up having to move north to Melton, which is based on Manchester. And this is during the Industrial Revolution, and The North is obviously very different from the South, from where they grew up, this very like idyllic kind of country setting. And Margaret is kind of adjusting to that. Her whole family is really. And her father is a tutor for this man, John Thornton, who is one of the mill owners there. And yeah, like the story I think is very well known for their romance, but also for the social commentary of this book. And I just think this is a really fantastic classic. Like, I really enjoyed rereading it. I adore Margaret as a character with my heart and soul. Like, it really frustrates me that people act like she's not strong enough. I think she's incredibly strong. She's very intelligent. She always stands up for herself. And the poor girl like goes through so much in the course of this book that like I just don't understand the complaint that she doesn't do enough, basically. And I also love John and the way he is written and the development of them separately, and like also their relationship. Their interactions are so good. Like, I love their relationship and their romance. There's like a few scenes at the end in particular that are just so good, and I love them. I also think that this book is really interesting thematically, the way it talks about grief, and about faith and belief and doubt, and also a little bit about religious tolerance, mostly, and also of course about capitalism and class and what the Industrial Revolution meant for those things, and things like workers' rights and unions. Like, I am so impressed at the nuance of the commentary here, just because Elizabeth Gaskell was writing at a time when, like, I think for the most part, people weren't really starting to critique the Industrial Revolution yet. They were still very much in the moment of, this is the best thing ever. And some of these conversations are conversations that we are still struggling to have now, about capitalism and about exploitive work practices and everything. And I just am very impressed at the way that she handles these things. I love the writing of this book itself. The way, like, I just think the emotions are written in a way that is so evocative. I think the humor, there's also some great humor here. I think the writing is very clever and engaging. Like I said, I think the characterization is fantastic. Like, I just really enjoy this book. Definitely check content warnings for this one as well, if you have anything that you're concerned about, because there are a few like very big things in here that I would warn people about. But yeah, this was so good. I will stand by this. I think the ending of the book is more romantic than the miniseries. Like, I enjoy the miniseries, but these couple scenes at the end, man, I just think you can't top them. Like, they're so good. Yeah, and I gave North and South 4 stars again. And then finally, the last book I finished in May was Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. This is the third and final book in the Live Ship Traders trilogy. I was a guest on the read-along. I will link that live show down below. And I'm not gonna really bother summarizing this because I summarized the first book and things are obviously very different by now. Hey guys, so obviously I'm filming this clip on a different day, because I realized after filming and starting to edit this wrap up that I maybe should have a little disclaimer before I get into the review for Ship of Destiny. Like, I didn't say anything that's not true or that I didn't mean, but I definitely was a lot less nice than I usually try to be when I'm negatively reviewing a book. So I'm gonna put a timestamp down below, and I really encourage you, if you like Robin Hobb, please skip this review. Like, I just really wasn't thinking about it in the headspace of people might watch this who like her books. So if you do like her books, I would encourage you not to watch this one. So again, I'll put a timestamp, and as I said, it's not that I like was not actually giving an honest review in this clip, and it's not like I normally don't give honest reviews when I negatively review books. It's just that I usually try and do it in a certain style, and I didn't do that here. Like, I'm always really careful not to criticize people who like the thing that I dislike, so I don't do that in the clip, but just like the way that I phrase things, as I said, I meant it all, but I just wasn't super nice about it. So here's my little disclaimer, and I encourage you to use this timestamp if you like her work. Okay, back to the review. It's really exhausting to not enjoy these books. Now, I'll say before I get into this that I am probably gonna continue, because I keep hoping it's gonna get better and that I'm gonna find some of that Robin Hobb magic everyone talks about, but also because this is one of those series that a good chunk of people in the fandom act like you can't have an opinion about these books until you've read all of them, which I think is ridiculous. But because I am very stubborn when people imply that I'm just not smart enough to get something, I am probably gonna try. Because this, like, yeah, this is just one of those series that people act like if you don't like it, then you're just not getting it, that your little tiny brain cannot comprehend the majesty of Robin Hobb, and that's why you don't enjoy them, which is very irritating and frustrating, and one of the other reasons that I'm probably going to try and push through. Yeah. Okay, so I'm already getting more upset than I thought I was going to. Before I even get into, this is probably going to be a much more disclaimer heavy review than I normally give, so I'm sorry about that. But before I even get into my thoughts on this specific book, I am realizing that one of the things that I find most upsetting about the mediocrity of the series is the fact that there are so many talented fantasy authors who are never gonna get this level of acclaim, even though they write so much better. And that really makes me sad, and I need to learn to let go of that as a part of my experience with these books, or I'm gonna be angry for the rest of my life, because I just feel like Robin Hobb is one of the most overrated authors I have ever read. At this point, maybe I will like other books more, but I just don't get it. Like, obviously reading is subjective, but it is rare that I have an experience like this where I literally feel like I'm reading different books than everyone else. Like, her characterization is so sloppy. Her storytelling is, I think, very lazy in a lot of ways, which is amazing considering these books are so long. But okay, actually talking about my review for this specific book, there were a couple things I liked, and I will start with those. My like trio of favorite characters were Amber, Clef, and Paragon. So I like that we spent a good chunk of time with them here. They were the only characters that were at the intersection of characters who I liked, characters whose storyline I cared about and thought was interesting, and characters that, I don't know, Robin Hobb wasn't trying to show off with, I guess, in a way that I just find very grating. So those were the only characters that I like genuinely had emotions for in this book, or that who I thought were well written. But I did like them. I really like some of the thematic things that happened with Bingtown and like changing communities and everything. I thought that was very interesting. I do think Robin Hobb's world building is very interesting. So like there was a little payoff for this book, but there was not very much, especially considering that this is a 2,700 page trilogy. I think we needed more than we got here in terms of storytelling and character development. I'll say that this is my least favorite book in the trilogy. It was 2.5 stars, but it was still better than Assassin's Quest. Yeah, like I don't even know where to begin with all the things that I think were bad about this book. Let's start with the overwriting. These books are too long. There's not nearly enough story or themes or character work to fill or justify those pages. And it really irritates me. Like, I think, not everyone who likes Robin Hobb, but from some reviews I have seen, I think people give Robin Hobb extra credit. Like, they give her the benefit of the doubt because her books are so long that, like, they must be well written, or, like, the characters must be well developed. Because I think her actual writing style is obviously good, but the characterization is so sloppy. And that's one of the things that I hear people like rave about with Robin Hobb, is how complex and interesting and well written her characters are. And I just strongly disagree. And I think that's one of the things that, because the books are so long, maybe people are kind of naturally assuming that the character, like, that there has to be well-developed characters because there are just so many pages spent on them. Again, like, I'm not saying that everybody who likes Robin Hobb is, like, mistaken about that. I'm just saying that that's a feeling I'm starting to get, is that some of the things that I find most dissatisfying are things that maybe there's a natural assumption from readers that if a book is long, it must be doing those things pretty well, you know? I also think the relationship development is not very good. Like, there are a few, I mean, there's just relationships in general that I think are sloppy, but especially, like, a few of the romances. I did like the one involving Brashen more, by comparison. But there is one that, like, I would like, except for the really disgusting age gap that is there for absolutely no reason. And then there's another one that I just loathe. Like, I knew it was coming from, like, the first time these characters, like, interacted, because it is so predictable, and it was even worse than I thought it was gonna be. It is just so lazy. And, like, I've said this before, but Robin Hobb makes her books predictable, which is weird. Like, okay, sorry, I'm getting, like, off in the weeds already, but, like, the reason that that's frustrating is not because I don't like predictable books. Honestly, I think unpredictable plot twists or whatever are overrated. I would rather have a story make sense than surprise me. But the thing that frustrates me about Robin Hobb's is that she acts like she's gonna blow your mind, and she doesn't. Like, literally everything that happens is so predictable once you realize that it's always gonna be, like, the least satisfying thing to happen, and it's gonna add 300 pages to the book. That's always what's gonna happen. So like anytime we're supposed to be like, oh my gosh, who saw this coming? It's like anybody who's been paying attention to your books. Also, going back to the sloppy character development, I personally feel like it is bad writing for a character to have like a very strongly defined personality here and then to be completely different there and to have very little time in the middle. Like I said this with Malta in the last book, that like obviously I like her a lot more at the end because that is what she's there for, is to be terrible and then to be not terrible. Like that is her purpose in the book. But I think it's weird that we spend so little time on the in-between stuff, which made her character arc feel very unearned and very sloppy. And I feel like here that happened with Cyrilla. It felt to me, and I'm not saying this is what happened, but it felt like Robin Hobb actually changed her mind between book 2 and book 3 about who Cyrilla was and what she wanted her to do. And I don't mean that characters can't develop. Like, I love character development when it's done well. Just to me, this does not feel done well. I also think it's worth noting that this book makes 85% of the plot of this series completely meaningless. Which I saw coming, and so it did not bother me as much as it could have. Like, I had very low expectations for this book, which I think is one of the reasons why I didn't hate it as much as Assassin's Quest. Is because, like, I knew this stuff was going to happen. I think Robin Hobb is one of those writers who believes that doing unsatisfying things for the story automatically makes you talented and makes you a good writer. And I really strongly disagree with that. Like, I'm not saying that everything should happen the way a reader wants it to or expects it to. That is not what I mean. I mean that, to me, there is no value or talent inherent in making things not make sense for characters, or because like her books are still very predictable, but they're predictable in ways that are completely unsatisfying because it's more about what Robin Hobb thinks will be the biggest shock or the most frustrating thing than what actually makes sense for the characters and for the story. And also because I feel like I always have to justify myself when I talk about how unsatisfying these books are. I am not asking for a perfect happy ending. I'm not even asking for a happy ending. There are lots of books that I love that are very bittersweet, or that have like you can have high stakes and not do books the way that Robin Hobb does. So I don't know, I guess I have to like prove my reviewer credibility by reminding everyone that I am not asking for everything to work out fine every time I read a book. I just think that there are ways to do endings that do not feel like such a colossal waste of time. Also, this has to be the most boring subplot with dragons I have ever read. Like, truly, I don't know how you make dragons this boring, but they were. And then one of the other, I think, real flaws of this book is the way that sexual assault was handled. Yeah, like it was, I'm not denying that some of it is realistic. My issue is not with the things that happened, it is with the way that things happened and with who it happened with. Like the assault and the gaslighting and everything are obviously very difficult to read, but I think the way they're handled is not bad by itself. My issue is with the way that she framed it, because one of the other things that really irritates me about Robin Hobb's characterization is it feels like she's smashing you in the face with a hammer about how you're supposed to feel about different characters. And so it is very obvious to me when that doesn't match up with what we are being shown in the story. And there are a couple of characters in particular who I feel like it is very clear that we are still supposed to like them or care about them, and I didn't, because there was a watershed moment for them and they colossally failed. And like, again, just I don't think Robin Hobb is subtle at all. So to me, it felt very much like we were supposed to understand where these characters were coming from, and I absolutely did not. Also, I really hate the way that trauma is handled. And I really hate the way that we are given a magical fantasy reason for why an evil character is evil. I think that's bullshit. It would have been like that character, who I hated, by the way. I don't think the ending, I don't think the way they were connected to the plot justified all the time we wasted on this character, but whatever. But like that character, we already would have understood them and understood their backstory if we had just left that magical part out of it. And so the fact that she added it, the only reason that she would have done that is if that were supposed to change the way we felt about them. And I didn't. I didn't at all. And it really, really bothers me that that was used in this book. Another disclaimer that I know these books were written a couple of decades ago, but I have read so many older books that handle gender better. I have read classics by Victorian men that handle gender better than Robin Hobb does. And that is just not an expectation I went into these books with. The way I hear people gush and gush and gush about her books and about her female characters and the way that she handles her themes led me to expect better. Like, I didn't go into this with the expectation of an older fantasy. I went into this expecting this to be really well handled, and I just don't think that's the case. Also, while I'm already upset, I also think there are people, again, not everyone who enjoys these books. I'm not making a blanket statement about, like, if you like Robin Hobb, then you're wrong because of this. I am just saying, from what I have witnessed, especially on Goodreads, I feel like there's a decent chunk of the Robin Hobb fan base who gives her extra credit just for writing adult fantasy. And that is very frustrating to me because there are middle grade and young adult fantasy authors who do characterization demonstrably better, for what I consider good characterization, and who do themes much better. And that is yet another thing that frustrates me about the way that Robin Hobb is held up as the only fantasy author to ever do anything. I am not going to give you bonus points just for writing adult. Like, that does not make your books better. That does not make your themes better. That does not make your story more well written. Like, that's just not how it works. Also, I promise I'm almost done because I just need to stop ranting. But I also want to clarify that I don't think making people angry automatically makes you a good writer, because that's something I sometimes come across, is when a book is, in my opinion, so bad that it actually upsets me. Sometimes people will respond with, well, the fact that the author gave you that emotional reaction must mean there's something there that's good. And I really disagree with that. I think that's very lazy writing, honestly. If you think that the only way you can convince people you're talented is if you piss them off, like, weird choice. Yeah, like, especially because I am a reader who, I've said before too, that, like, favorite books or books that I love have to be ones that engage my head and my heart. And Robin Hobb does neither for me. Like I said, there were aspects of her writing that I think are good, but in terms of a book that I both feel is good and also can articulate why it is good, like on an intellectual level, these books do not do that for me. And I don't think just making a reader angry because of how much they dislike your book, that does not mean your book is good. Anyway, this is like probably the most disorganized review I have ever done. And believe it or not, like I said, I gave Ship of Destiny 2.5 stars. It's a 1 star in my heart, but I didn't give it 1 star because, as I said, there are small elements that I think were good. But this is just one of those series that the more I think about it, the more angry I get. Like, this is a series that is going to, like, I think sour in my feelings the longer I'm away from it. But I am glad I read it. I'm sorry that was such a negative note to end the video on. I'm still gonna try because I am determined that I'm going to be able to say to people, I stuck it out and here's how I feel. Like, you know, even though I know that that's gonna hurt me more than it hurts them, but we'll see. The upside is that no matter what happens, I will either be proven right or I will be pleasantly surprised. Like, truly, I know it doesn't sound like it. I would love to eat my words. Like, I would love to come back after reading the next series and be like, I see the magic. So I hope that's what happens. Please comment down below. please comment down below and let me know if you also are kind of unimpressed with Robin Hobb, because it feels very lonely over here. So just let me know that. Let me know if you have read any of these books and like what you thought of them, or if you're going to pick them up. Let me know the last book that you got so passionate about. Could be in a positive or negative way. But like, that's something I've been noticing more and more, is that idea that if you get angry about a book, it must have something worthwhile to it. I reject that vehemently. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye.